Is traumatic experiences often move us to what could be best from here rather than moving us back to what once was. Now, most of us want to, when we're enduring trauma, we're enduring something hard, we want things to go back to the way they were. So often, I remember praying that, I just want my family back. I just want this thing to be resolved, but that doesn't always happen in any area of life. Now, the scripture doesn't promise a return, but it does promise this. James says, count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds. So all of the big clutter that's going on in life, because life is beautiful and life is hard, count it joy, for the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. Testing is never fun and joyful, by the way, right? It is endurance. It looks like a lot of times trauma. It produces steadfastness. Let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. In other words, what he's saying is somehow in the trial, in the test, there's something that you acquire that can't be acquired any other way. Romans 8 says this, and by the way, these are not Bible verses that you should spout off to someone very flippantly who is in the middle of a trial. You can't just bumper sticker this one on. This is stuff that's best looked at in faith, kind of on your own while you digest the tension of life is good and life is hard, and I don't know where this is going. And then some of this only makes sense in the rearview mirror. Paul says we know that for those who love God, all things work together for the good. He doesn't say all things are good. In fact, some things are outright horrible and horrific, traumatic. He says all things work together for the good for those who are called according to his purpose. And then Ecclesiastes 3:11, Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, says he has made everything beautiful in its time. I mean, notice, he says everything. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is one of those things that we have to just lean on and embrace the tension that sometimes there's a bigger canvas being painted than what we can actually see. Solomon continues, he's also set eternity in the human heart. So somehow there's this tension that we feel and realize that things aren't going to be like they're supposed to be always right here. And he continues, no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. In other words, a lot of times there are more questions than there are answers, but we can embrace this, that trials impart something to us that can't be acquired in any other means. And there is the tension. The tension much of the time is that in order for there to be a gain, there sometimes has to be a huge, massive loss. Yet at the same time, that loss is still a massive loss that brings a lot of hurt. I was talking about this with my friend, Dr. Jim Bob, in Salt Lake City. We were there for an event with Young Living Essential Oils for a convention a couple years ago. I was going through a tough season. He had been through a tough season and was honestly in the middle of it. Different, tough, but we're sitting there and we're talking. I'd been writing a book on emotional health and he was writing a foreword for it, and we had been shooting the video together for that course. And in the middle of the restaurant there, we start talking about Job and the story from the Old Testament. And Jim Bob actually says, hey, a lot of people look at the story of Job and they think, hey, this is a great story of redemption and restoration. And as we dialogued, I told him, I said, it kind of seems like people do that, but it just reveals that they don't really read the story. You see, when you read the story, here's what you find out really quickly. You can look at the list on the screen. The Sabians invade, taking oxen and killing Job's servants. These would be trusted people who were business partners, leaders with him. And then fire falls from heaven, obliterating his herd of sheep and the servants who are tending those sheep. So he loses more stuff and more people. And then the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, they scoop in. They take away all of his camels. A strong wind breezes through. It knocks the supports from under his home, causing the roof to fall. His kids are buried alive in that moment. His friends blame him. His wife can't stand the fact that he is even alive and breathing. She tells him to curse God and die. Well, at the end of the story, which everybody knows, you realize that Job has more kids. You know that his wealth is virtually doubled. You know that things seem to look incredibly well for him. That's the tension, is it worked out for the good. It worked out for on the surface what would look like better. It worked out so well that we even sing lines from the book of Job. You know, there's a song in Christendom right now that people sing, like, he gives and takes away. He gives and takes away. They don't realize that in the story, it was Satan that was taking away. That Satan is the one that's ripping things and removing things from Job. And in the end, even though he has more children, he still lost the first children. In the end, he's married. We don't know if that was his wife or if that's a new wife, if she finally just left him and gave up on this faith struggle and the things that they were enduring. In other words, he had a good life at the end, but he still lost the good life at the beginning. There was still loss. The restoration didn't mean a scooped up, tidied up, cleaned up return of what once was. It was something different. You see, we often assume that restoration means return. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it means resurrection. Sometimes it means, just like Jesus, things are radically different than they were before the trauma, different than during the trauma, and different than after the trauma. Jim Bob and Cindy, a couple years ago, lost a child, Evans. People said stupid things like, "You'll get over it." Well, in his words, he says, you don't get over it, you get through it. And the Lord blessed us with more kids. And we're grateful for those more kids, but we still mourn the loss of this child. You see, you get through a divorce that you didn't want. You don't get over it, you get through it. And the Lord rebuilds and adds to life and continues to bless. You see, and therein lies the tension. Sometimes there's no indication in the former that the latter was ever possible. Sometimes the resurrected life looks that different than what once was. Now, in the New Testament, there are two